Hello, everyone. I'm David Berkowitz, and welcome to another edition of AI Insiders by AI Marketers Guild. And we've got an exciting guest today, someone I'm really eager to hear from, Dr. Cecilia Dones. Just a tremendous background as a chief data officer among other esteemed roles. And we were geeking out on what's going on in the AI space. We met through initially another community. I've been a longtime member of Research Wonks, a big fan of that for folks who are deep in the data and analytics space. And about 90% of the posts there are over my head, which is why it's fun being in some rooms where there are such smart people so deep in the field that I can just try to learn a few things from. But Dr. Dones, Cecilia, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for everyone for joining. I know it's the middle of the week. It's also lunchtime for some of us who are on the East Coast. And so the dedication and attention is much, much appreciated.
Yeah.
So would it be helpful, unless everyone LinkedIn stalked me, which could be a thing? You're definitely okay to do that. So a little bit about me. So I am a QualQuant researcher who spent my entire career being fascinated in trying to tell stories about people using data. And so everything I've ever done is following that curiosity. The good part of my industry experience was focused in marketing and ad land. So I have done my tour of duty with WPP and Publicis, and I've also done a tour of duty on the brand side. So some brands that may be familiar, L'Oreal, LVMH, and more recently, as being part of the data game that we all do, I finished my doctoral dissertation, and what I was focusing on was trust and authenticity signals in technology-mediated interpersonal communications, which is the longest way of saying I have trust issues with the internet, and I don't know what to believe anymore. And so I figured maybe some research in that area might be helpful for others as well. What I'm doing recently, I do teach. So I teach primarily AI ethics. More recently, I have been teaching K through 12 AI ethics, which is very interesting. So trying to speak about AI ethics and responsible AI to middle schoolers. Oh, so many things I've learned. But it's very interesting to see how organizations are really investing in that kind of AI literacy, especially in the youth. I teach that. I will be placed in NYU in the spring, teaching emerging technologies there. So I will be continuing that. And I hang out in the responsible AI ethics space, writing, doing a little bit of research, and consulting organizations that are trying to do this AI thing a little bit better. So, in transparency, David and I collaborated or conspired to have this conversation after he was back from holiday, because I had mentioned AI fake. Oh, yes, fake. Well, first of all, fake news, and then AI fake news. That makes it a little bit more complicated. But David and I actually wanted to postpone this conversation until after he was back from holiday because I had mentioned my secondary research area, which is AI, artificial intimacy. So when we start to have relationships that are a little bit interesting with the machines, and what does that mean from a psychological standpoint at the individual level and more broadly at the societal level? But keeping it in marketing land, I was like, okay, I totally have a talk. I'll have slides, all the things, and then the news. And when the news happened about OpenAI and what they're doing with Etsy, collapsing the marketing funnel, and I said, oh dear, okay, this is interesting. This could be good for consumers, or it could be interesting how marketers deal with it, because there's almost no more the journey collapses, intervention points are removed from the process. And then, like within the last 24 hours, which totally blew up my whole talk, does anyone know who Tilly Norwood is? Okay, yes.
Oh, well,
Some would argue
yes.
that this is our first worldwide AI actor, and apparently she's looking for an agent. And so these two things represent what's happening in the latest wave of technology. And so I was thinking about it this morning, actually, as my presentation was blown up. Us as marketers, our discipline began with, oh gosh, we have to listen to our consumers. We have to understand our customers. We are very human first. We have to be making sure that there's always an alignment between product and the consumer and their consumer needs. And so we spend a whole bunch of energy at trying to understand consumer psychology. However, with these latest developments in technology that's changing our ecosystem, we're moving from what I would argue is human-centric campaigns where we have personas, we focus on people, hopefully people, to more of an agent-centric ecosystem, meaning the machines are mediating so much of the process between the brand and the consumer. It forces us to have to think about this ecosystem in a different way. And I will put this idea out there. If anyone wants to write this textbook, I'm more than happy to be second author, third author, even an honorable mention. I'm very happy to. Something I was thinking about that we should kind of write, and maybe as practitioners, it would totally make sense. AI marketing for AI, when machines are selling to machines. I think it's a little bit clickbaity, the title. We can work on it. But I think that's where the industry is moving forward, meaning more and more of the interactions, especially in virtual and digital spaces, will be mediated by these technologies that, yes, help us. It is the medium to convey our messages, but they also act. And that's the slight distinction from maybe previous iterations of technology. Previous iterations of technology was more like facilitating some of the consumption. And so e-commerce, that totally changed things for us. We all had to think about our e-commerce websites. But this one is a little bit different in the sense that there is more agency. And so do I think agentic is going to be a thing in 2026? We'll talk about it a lot. Maybe some brands will make mistakes that we can talk about even more. Is it going to be a ubiquitous consumer experience? I'm cautious. However, it is something for those of us who are marketing leaders and marketing strategists and have been in the game for a little bit longer. I think we have to actually really do properly think about how do we think of this ecosystem when the consumer journey has collapsed and that when machines act on behalf of consumers itself.
And I mean, bringing up Tilly Norwood right now, I mean, we have the Screen Actors Guild coming out very strongly against this and making a stance for human creativity. But it's also funny because we also obviously so much of what we consume, right? They're characters. We're going and we're watching the Marvel movies because of the characters in them. It's less important, I think, for most folks who's actually playing them, although it's really fun to see Robert Downey Jr. in his various roles and whatnot. But then also, we have this point where, like, if we look at the rise of some of these virtual influencers, like little Michaela, that BMW actually did a sponsorship with, and then like they're like little Michaela, for instance, is getting gigs anyway, right? Like there are people paying her, its team to go and run branded campaigns. So it's like how do we even draw lines? I mean, it's one thing to draw a line between like what's human and what's AI, but when like so much of what we consume anyway is some like some CGI created character to begin with, when consumers are already like following these characters that don't exist in real life. I mean, like how do we even make these distinctions anymore? And is it and I'm even curious your take, because like I love like human first everything over tech, but like, are these actual battles worth fighting? Like, is this like is SAG going to be our last round of defense here, the Screen Actors Guild, or is this just like some lost cause and they're going to be seen as, yeah, fighting some battle well, that ship sailed, right? Like, I'm so curious where you're thinking of this as you see this controversy around Tilly Norwood come up.
Yeah, no worries. Well, one, compensation models have changed because business models are changing. That's just a given. As dynamic ecosystems change, obviously the mechanisms and incentives that we have to incentivize different behaviors will also change. So that's going to happen. Do I have a crystal ball? No. How it will change, I don't know. What I will say is that maybe, and I could be more clear about this, is the two examples, the OpenAI with Etsy and this Tilly situation. What makes it a little bit, gives me the ick, is that these platforms and these technologies are removing some of the social signals that we would normally depend on when we are trying to build trust. And as marketers, part of our remit, part of our the promise or the value we create for the organization is we hold that trust with the consumer. We ensure that as best as we can, we are continuing to reinforce that trust between the consumer and the brand. Are there cases where there are cultures, for example, this is very common in China, where you have virtual influencers that actually do live streaming and people still consume and it doesn't bother them and it's part of the cultural norms and values? Perfectly fine. They are transparent that these are virtual influencers.
Mhm.
So in the case of ChatGPT and Etsy, when a consumer starts to say, okay, I need a new charm or a gift or something like that, and something pops up as a recommendation, is it coming from OpenAI? Is it actually coming? Is it reading from the reviews from Etsy? Where is this recommendation coming from? Is it biased? Is the brand actually paying for it? We have no more signals for this. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. In the Tilly situation, I get it, good for PR. But the lack of transparency that, hey, she's AI, and they were running all these adverts and messaging around her. Yes, it does get her in the news. But again, it's one of those things where it's one of the fundamental components regarding trust in specific, that there needs to be some level of one's perception and belief that the other person is going to act in such a way that is, one, beneficial, two, I would argue, helpful, and then three, kind of consistent. And I can give everyone a little bit of a framework here. So researchers from many, many moons ago, it's called the BIC framework. I'm quite certain some of us are already familiar with it. So in building trust, and this was done with organizational psychology, original research. So how do organizations trust each other? And then more importantly, how do people inside those organizations trust each other? We had to prove benevolence. Is this actually going to help the consumer? What is the consumer benefit? In AI land, common violations is that what's the distinction between manipulation versus a nudge? And so as us marketers, when we think about utilizing AI responsibly, there isn't going to be a regulation. Sorry. Or let's say, let's not hold our breaths for a federal regulation, at least here in the US. So that means at the leadership level at the organization, we're going to have to make these decisions. So one, benevolence. Two, integrity. Are you going to deliver on your promise? Are you going to surprise? Are you going to surprise me in a not so good way? Or are you going to be transparent? So when we use AI for hidden automations, if we have exaggerated claims, there has been already cases where firms have been fined for exaggerating claims. And in the data space, we tend to call it AI washing, but in other contexts, they use different words. But the idea of going beyond puffery This is something that's critically important to make sure that we are reinforcing with our consumers that our brands have integrity, even when we're using technology. And then the last component, competence. So can we consistently show up? Can we execute reliably? And so if we use AI technologies to help facilitate a conversation, okay, fine. We have a chatbot. Excellent. Good idea. Is it actually making relevant recommendations? When a consumer tries to find out a little bit more information about a product, does it start to hallucinate? Did we actually check for that corner case, use case, all of those things? Are we actually reinforcing that we know what we're doing with this technology? And so when we're trying to reinforce trust between the consumer and the brand, benevolence, integrity, compliance, BIC, these are the questions I ask marketing leaders all the time. Help me understand, how are you actually showing this and demonstrating this to your customer, as opposed to, let's see all the shiny things that we can do with AI and technology. And with that, I'm going to pause for a second because I see one hand raised. Karen, I see you. Would you like to add or challenge?
I would like to add, AI certainly has a lot of capabilities. So the first question that comes to mind is, all of these ideas, do they actually work? Right? So agents talking to agents and eliminating people. You see so many reports out there that 80% of all these AI initiatives in corporations are failing. They're not producing the results that they are intended to produce. There was a talk that resonated with me, and the title was Philosophy Beats AI. And they broke down the philosophy of why you want to use AI. And they said that the first most important thing is your purpose. Why are you wanting to use it? For example, in the example that you gave for having AI actors replace humans, what's the purpose of that? Is the purpose to cut costs? Why are you doing what you're doing? And then the next one, and you talked about that, is the ontology, understanding the nature of AI, of what it can and it cannot do. Whether it's giving you the right recommendations. And so that is critical. I think a lot of people kind of freak out about AI because they really don't step back for a second to say, okay, all of these ideas are there, but will they actually work? And a lot of that also requires a lot more understanding of the human nature to be able to assess what the benefits and the dangers of AI are.
Agree. Agree. Very, very, very much so. I think there has to be a radical clarity around the why, or what is the particular consumer benefit. I mean, we can pull it back into economics, right? So all these big firms that are having multi-billion valuations, they're not particularly profitable at the moment. And if they want to have subscription models at 200 or 200 plus a pop, they can keep trying, but it's not going to be particularly scalable. So they are going to have to shift their business model such that they can be a bit more revenue positive and then eventually profitable. So it's not going away. Whether or not it degrades the consumer experience, I agree. The using technology for technology's sake, yes, most likely we're going to have all sorts of poor experiences. I'll give you an example where I put on my AI ethics hat. Recently, and this is where I get very curious about the PR team or the comms team that was putting this out. I believe it was an airline, and I want to say it was Delta Airlines. They got very excited. They wanted to communicate. They were utilizing AI. And the way they were utilizing AI was, oh, well, we can use AI to figure out this pricing challenge. So for individuals, maybe large enterprise businesses, maybe they can pay more for a ticket versus somebody who's a regular person, mid-range, whatever, and they can maybe pay less. And so, people with deeper pockets, fantastic. We can like AI this problem, and suddenly we'll make sure that the flights are full, and we'll be able to extract a bit more value from different consumer cohorts. And so they were quite excited about this. And then it became very quickly for those of us who hang out in AI ethics circles, oh, okay, this is nice. This sounds like surveillance pricing. And so now they're utilizing data signals, maybe your zip code, maybe your previous purchasing behaviors, maybe the previous places you went to determine, whether or not you should pay an extra $200, $300, $400. Okay, maybe that's a little bit icky, maybe a little bit. Where it gets really icky is what if in the data marketplace, and this does exist, we start to have these data science get really smart and they start figuring out, oh, wait, the behavior of this individual, we don't need to know who they are, but the behavior of this individual, it seems like they need to purchase a ticket in urgency. Somebody passed away in the family. A new birth in the family. I need to go from here to there very, very quickly. I don't have time. It's time sensitive. What if an airline jacked up the price as a result of that? Because that's what the data signal said.
And this is
so
really
those are the use cases where AI ethics and responsible AI is so critical, because it's not a first order effect that we're worried about. It's the second and third order effects that I would argue marketers, we are in many ways, we may be the only voices in our organizations that represent the consumer.
Can I say something? I would argue with you that this is really not AI ethics. It's human and corporate ethics. You're using tools to do something that's unethical. Data and science does what data and science does. It's objective in its own way. It's the human beings who are using that data to extract, do whatever it is that they do. So I'd argue against AI ethics. This has nothing to do with AI ethics. This is about corporate ethics, capitalist ethics, and really the core problem with human nature and culture, not technology.
Fair. Technology is a tool. I don't argue semantics because I think most disagreements are a result of slight variations of definitions. If it changes behavior, that's when I say, okay, we need to come to common ground. So if I say corporate ethics to a board, well, that changed their behavior. If I say AI ethics or responsible AI, will that change their behavior? We are saying our values are aligned. I think the words we use in different forums are the ways that we kind of persuade the argument to move things forward.
Okay.
I mean, we are in a marketing forum, right? So you do have to talk a little bit about marketing, and I did promise to talk about technology. But I appreciate the point that maybe technology is, we can be philosophical too. I appreciate the point that maybe the technology is just a further extension of all the tools that we've ever made. So fire included. Yeah. So something that I recently came across in the internet that I got really excited about because it came back. How many of us remember Clippy?
Of course.
Okay, yes, that weird the weird paperclip that used to try to be ever so helpful. Oh gosh, I can't remember what decade it was at this point, and I don't want to age myself, so we're just going to say it was a while ago. And it was really annoying at the time because it would constantly be popping up in your Word while you were using Word or while you were using Excel to try to help you. And I argue that as brands continue to experiment in this space, experiment with trying to use technologies to deliver different kinds of value to consumers in their experience, given that we don't have necessarily broad-based regulations, given that maybe we don't necessarily agree on what values and rules to uphold, that brands may want to consider, how do we show ourselves to be a bit more like a Clippy? And why I argue that is that um, Clippy was not always the most helpful, but it was very transparent at what it could do and what it could not do. And also, it was always being very clear that it was there. And so I really want to focus on kind of the transparency and understandability components regarding technology use. I don't have to use the words AI anymore if we don't want. And so as marketers, as we continue to use these technologies, I ask the question always, are we being clear to the average consumer? Are we disclosing in a way that they understand? Are we owning the limits around these technologies? Meaning, you know what? This chatbot is only good for, I don't know, figuring out how to return a product. Maybe it's not good at extrapolating out like different use cases of the product. Okay, be transparent about that. Being clear that users should have some form of consent mechanism. Okay, you don't want to talk to the chatbot anymore. You want to speak to a real person. Okay. Making things understandable to the end user. So showing the reasoning as appropriate to the end user. So if it is a B2B firm, B2B SaaS, and you're talking to devs, so it's developer evangelism, the way you communicate and speak will sound quite different from a marketing standpoint, as opposed to if you're speaking to the average consumer who may not be in the tech space. And then from a measurement standpoint, I get asked this quite often. Okay, if we're not supposed to be measuring engagement, what are we supposed to be measuring? I would argue we need to measure the components related to trust. So, like, how confident is our consumer? Meaning, do they understand what technologies are we using? Do they understand how the output came about? The comprehension, do they understand what they can do or what they can opt in and opt out of? And then I tend to say this quite often, consent, consent, consent. And consent isn't a one-time thing. It's a continuous thing in the sense that it is, it happens throughout the life cycle, throughout the process of the relationship of the consumer with the brand. And so I figure that doing those types of things can help to mitigate any potential risks when it comes to utilizing these technologies when we don't necessarily know what the second or third order outcomes will be. David, I didn't realize the chat is on fire.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the chat, so I was just checking on that.
Any questions? Are we in mid-group? We are today, so I'm okay if people want to raise hands or throw out a question or throw out a provocation.
So, I mean, I'm curious that as we talk about ethics, and you mentioned that like regulation isn't coming here anytime soon in a meaningful national way. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So so what's going to motivate like marketers in particular to do more than the law demands in that sense? And it's like in terms of ethics around AI, right? Like if acting in if there's not going to be any like legal penalty for acting unethically in a lot of cases, or there's going to be a lot of that gray area. Like for those that you're seeing trying to do things right, like what's motivating them, and is there anything that can like help our marketers that want to do the right thing but might face an uphill battle when it's not necessarily being required of them?
Very true. It can be quite challenging. This is why in practice, I tend to say responsible as opposed to ethical, because one, we have to agree on ethics. That's not always true. And ethics is usually reinforced through policy, which in the US, not likely to happen. So from a responsible standpoint, I continue to reiterate transparency, understandability, and then accountability with consent. If marketers can do those things, you mitigate some of the risks. You asked me if there are any firms that are thinking about doing these things and how are they kind of addressing it. I see a lot of this already happening inside of the mental health care tech space. There are firms that are trying to do right. And yes, it could be for the greater good, or it could be, oh, wait, who just got, did Sam Alton just get sued because a very unfortunate, irreversible, poor outcome has occurred? Yes. A teenager had decided to end their life as a result of a relationship, a parasocial relationship with ChatGPT. That's OpenAI. If you are a firm that maybe is not as deeply resourced or is not necessarily as favored in the marketplace in the moment, and you're just in the middle of the road, do you want to take those risks? And so that's where I feel like marketing can take a proactive stance and take a proactive stance in terms of building these guardrails. I tend to make the analogy. We have choices. We have a very, very fast moving car, and the cars are only getting faster. And so that is what the platforms are doing. And they have very much every right to do so. They're well resourced to do so. However, those of us who are facing consumers as part of our roles, we have a choice to say, hey, can we build some seatbelts? Hey, can we tell people about seatbelts? There's no requirement to force people to wear seatbelts, and it's going to take a long time if that's something that we as a society choose to do. But the fact to raise the idea that, hey, we should probably have seatbelts. We want to mitigate any kind of litigation risk, or we want to talk about seatbelts because, reputational risk is a problem. And this is something we want to manage against. So imagine a world very soon where we use only the LLMs to do our exploratory search. Help me, Perplexity, help me book a vacation. And Perplexity gives me the hotels, gives me all of those things. The brand will no longer have intermediary control. So if in that scenario, it offers me a Hilton versus a Marriott, and in my mind, I'm like, ooh, Hilton. I'm not sure if I'm okay with all of their business practices. I may choose differently. And so the role of the marketer, I think, slightly changes when it comes to all of these more recent technologies, meaning trust becomes even more important. Brand becomes even more important. And those are not performance marketer type of ideas. It's more, arguably, more traditional brand marketing. That's where I think marketers can take a proactive stance.
What do you mean by brands will be more important? Seems like it'd be less important if you have AI agents making the purchasing decisions as opposed to the consumer themselves.
There will be a consent mechanism, right? What happens if we have a whole bunch of random agents like just booking vacations and buying buying goods and services? Okay, me as the consumer, I say, no, my agent made a mistake. Credit card company, undo that. That creates a whole sorts of second order and third order effects of annoying transaction, this and that. And so the marketplace will have to figure out what are those mechanisms to minimize that. But there will be some version of consent because many people, as they learn this new behavior of having agents purchase things on their behalf, will make mistakes. And so this is where I'm always a little bit cautious because there is the future state that may happen. There's the current state, and then there's the actual harms that are occurring now that we could actually take action against.
I would agree that we are very much in a new field in terms of the jump from search to social, social to mobile. Now it's the AI. And we're going to see where what brands are doing moving fast and breaking things. And I think there'll be a market correction. I'm not with Karan when he talks about the philosophical debate about that's debatable, that's subjective, I think, in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the bottom line. And brands are going to respond to how their implementation and configuration of AI and how they use it for their consumers are impacted bottom line. So you can get philosophical if you want and talk about brand values from a branding standpoint, but at the end of the day, it's about the money. And if that's why Pepsi pulled the ad with Jenner, that's why we had the conversation with Jimmy in the last couple of weeks. At the end of the day, how we choose to use AI or how brands choose to use it will be impacted by how it affects their bottom line initiatives. That's just my argument.
I hear you. So it sounds like this crew is very much of the, and please feel free to correct me. I'm not suggesting every brand has to use AI. Not all problems are solved by AI.
Agreed.
But my bias is I am very much focused on trying to understand what to trust, who to trust, and what is the role of marketing in helping me understand who to trust, what to trust. So I'm actually quite curious. Outside of generative AI capabilities, I'm curious if anyone has any current experience utilizing AI technologies to try to enhance the consumer experience. If not, or just do an efficiency play. I'm curious about people's experiences with that.
Well, I have developed a RAG solution, and I think in my experience, what's critical is to understand the nature of AI. And when you have a RAG solution and you add your own content and then let AI act on that content, it gives you a much deeper understanding about the value of it, but also the shortcomings and how you can fix the problems. The key thing for using AI in anything is right now you should have a clear purpose of why you want it. If your idea, and I think that's where the market has failed a lot, is a lot of the corporate heads, the first thought is AI is going to help save me a lot of money because I don't have to hire people and I can shortcut things. If that's your thinking, I think that is a recipe for failure. But if you have a very clear idea and objective for what you want to achieve, and then have a very good understanding of the strengths and limitations of AI. What is hallucination, inference, and you can really get a good understanding of it when you know the content that is being used to generate those answers. Then you can certainly have ideas, and I think a lot of great solutions for customer support. I think RAG solutions have a big play in how AI will be used in the future. Certainly content generation and content marketing is also good, but you have to have a very good understanding of the nature of AI and also understand that a lot of it is a black box. I mean, the interpretability of AI, the fact that even the people who built it don't really understand how some answers are inferred, how it actually makes decisions. And if you have those black boxes, then applying AI to some really serious, critical applications will become very challenging. But if you have a very clear purpose of why you want to use it, I think there's a lot of great understandings. And I think that AI agents are also, again, if the focus is clearly defined, then I think you can have success. But to think that they can just do the job of a human is not realistic.
In HR circles, yes, that is definitely the sentiment. I loved how you were bringing up a little bit more technical conversation. So I had the fortunate experience to actually be able to attend the Advertising Research Foundation's a Marketing Science Institute conference earlier this week at Columbia University around analytics and forecasting. And without getting too technical, I'm not sure everyone's background. What was very promising in terms of how do we make this AI actually useful? Most of the presentations, similar underlying thread. You cannot take anything off the shelf. Don't. Bad idea. However, you can utilize RAG methods to constrain and constrain the information related to the context of your business. So the externalities, your competitors, for example, things like that, while utilizing also fine tuning of those models. So information about your particular consumers to actually create a more bespoke AI model. Is there going to be issues with explainability and interpretability? Yes. However, when it comes to making things a bit more bespoke in such a way that it actually delivers some value that makes some kind of sense in the context of your firm and your customers, these are methods that combined together can be quite promising. More research has to be done, and obviously more implementation has to be done.
In my experience, there's a lot of engineering required. LLM does a job, but you also have to then be able to process the questions. And then on the back end, you also have to then process the answers as well. And the more structured content you have in a RAG solution, and then you can engineer your content to continuously provide relevant answers. Like recently, I had an experience where, the LLMs will always want to create an answer. So somebody asks a question, and the answer was accurate, but the reference link that was generated with that answer was not the right reference link. So the content was still there. It was able to create the right answer, but
Yeah.
And then when I researched that a little bit, they said that, well, you need to maybe tag your content differently in order to be able to. So what I'm saying is that there's an engineering involved in creating systems that work, and that seems to be the reality of how all of this works right now.
Yes. And even in those cases, there has been some empirical work done in the space. Even in those cases when we're trying to create lineage and provenance as an output, we're still getting a little bit of hallucination. So it can still be up to 10% of those citations, even in a RAG architecture and fine-tuning architecture, is still a hallucination. And so, yes, there are significant challenges. I always caution against getting into too deep of a technical conversation because sometimes focusing on the technical conversation abstracts away from, I continue to argue, the role of the marketer inside of the organization. The marketer is in charge of the relationships, I thought, or at least I was educated.
They are.
Okay, good.
They are, and sales. Marketer starts the relationship and sales closes the relationship in terms of bringing them on board, usually.
Okay. So if we start only focusing on the ones and zeros and we only start focusing on the platforms, sometimes we forget those things are actually meant to be people.
Yeah.
Relationships can hurt if the answers are not trustworthy, right? So that's
Well, yeah, Karen, but you're overstating the point. The point of any campaign, any initiative, whether it's the Pepsi example, et cetera, or the example that Cecilia mentioned before, it's a build, measure, learn loop. The whole point is to put something out in the market, get the feedback from your marketplace, from your consumers especially, and then adjust accordingly. And the same way we've been doing it for decades in this new internet industry. Keep in mind, the internet is only about 30 years old. We're doing the same thing now with AI, and we're going to teach AI in the same way we're teaching ourselves. My job as an analyst early in my career is to take a look at the data, analyze it, provide insights, and optimize campaigns. That's what we're teaching AI to do. So there's no difference from what I've been doing in my career to what we're teaching AI to do now. We just have to be more explicit, like you talked about from the technical standpoint, creating structured data. There's no difference. I don't understand this anti-AI bias that people seem to have?
There is no anti-AI. It's understanding that, like you said, teaching AI what to do has some limitations because it doesn't always do what you tell it to do, because we don't really understand the interpretability part of the AI. So that's what we're talking
That
about.
hard training, but that's fine, and that's called training it. In the same way we would train an
No,
intern.
it's not just training. It's not just training. The training has its limitations. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You can train it all you want, but if the engine is a black box, if interpretability, there are engineers who built it are working on trying to understand how it interprets, there are limitations to the results. And that's the reality of this AI.
That's with any technology. There are always limitations. We work around them.
In the old days, when you programmed something, you always knew what you got out of it. In AI, you don't understand. It's a black box, right? You train it with a lot of parameters. There are too many parameters in there, and they don't always know whether the answer is accurate or not. That's what hallucination is. And that you have to work that into the equation.
So I'm curious to try to synthesize and then provoke the conversation a bit further. Let's talk about the automotive industry. And so now we're talking about a long time ago. So there was the cars were competing with horses and buggies, and there were no roads, so no infrastructure. And we didn't have laws that said, hey, maybe you don't want the wheel to fall off. Maybe you don't want the engine to explode. Maybe you want seatbelts. And so it was very, very new. We were learning into the space. I think the discomfort, and now I'm going to speak for myself, the discomfort I tend to feel about the whole thing is related to, I get it, technology, there's always going to be limitations. But what I get a sense of as a consumer, as a person that is participating in this, not just an outsider looking in, there's not enough accountability. So if something goes wrong, what happens? That's what we're learning now. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And this is where I continue to plead and advocate for marketers because, again, in many ways, sometimes we're the only voice of the consumer inside of our organizations. Okay, how do we at least hold ourselves accountable that if something bad happens, we have a way of redress. We have a way of repairing maybe a damaged relationship with the consumer. And so I'm curious if the challenge we're facing now has to do more with accountability for negative outcomes as opposed to just things don't work. I'm curious if anyone agrees, disagrees. Maybe I'm off topic. I'm more than happy. This is a really smart group. So
I would agree.
Again,
I think it's
you said it as opposed to just finish what you said at the end. Say it again, please. You said
I was
opposed to, and then I missed it.
Oh, sorry. I'm curious if it's more important for us to think about accountability as opposed to capability. Technology always changes. The capabilities are always limited in some dimension. So is it more that we should be thinking about how do we hold ourselves accountable to negative outcomes that maybe faces our consumers? And then how do we protect our firms?
Number one, I think AI technology is incredible. And I think that when you understand what you want to use it for and you have a clear purpose, it has a lot of applications. Your ethics are your ethics. If you're an ethical person, you look to use it in the right way. If you're unethical, you look to use it in ways, for whatever purposes that you have. So that's a human problem, not an AI problem. And we need to be able to distinguish that. But AI is a very powerful technology. It has a lot of great applications. It solves a lot of problems, but sometimes people have the wrong ideas of why they want to use AI. And that's, again, goes back to the person and not to the technology. The technology is what it is. It has tremendous capabilities and it has some shortcomings. And if you want to use it, you have to understand it.
I don't understand how the insides of a car work, but I'm allowed to have a driver's license.
Exactly.
Yep. And but when you get into a car and you drive it, you understand what the rules are for that. When you use AI to solve problems, you also have to understand, and not take whatever comes out of it and understand what the results are. That's your responsibility to take the data and do something with it, right? You don't have to understand interpretability and inference and hallucination, but you do have to understand that everything that comes out of it is not gospel, and you should use it, carefully. How you use it, that's your responsibility. That's not AI's responsibility.
Oh, so the responsibility of any negative outcome, the accountability for any negative outcome is at the individual user, not at the firm.
You're responsible for your own actions and your own thoughts.
Well, I mean, this I mean, it would be actually a fascinating debate for another section because we're almost at time here. But even, I mean, I think the car example is a good one because we see examples where most of the time someone goes and kills or hurts another person with a car. It's going to be the driver's fault. But there are times when an airbag doesn't deploy, the brakes don't work as planned, and sometimes that's actually requires a whole system-wide recall of tons of vehicles because there was something done at the manufacturer level that it was either an oversight or came up after the fact, and any harm that's done for that winds up clearly their fault, and they have to also prevent any harm from happening, even if it hasn't happened yet. So having this dichotomy of when harm comes from the manufacturers, in this case, the OpenAIs and Metas and Googles of the world, that seem to have carte blanche to have some cars with some pretty wobbly wheels come and out there. It's very fast engines and maybe not enough treads on their tires. But also, like, to the other point, like, most folks out there, we don't know how to drive yet, right? We're just, we're still like, and if we're driving, we're like driving this 500 horsepower car on like a dirt or gravel road that was not designed for the car. It was designed for the horses that came before it. So we've got a lot to navigate here. Like, I'd love to dive into that further. We don't have as much time here. I hope we can continue this in Slack and in future conversations. The participation is fascinating as always here. So I appreciate everyone who's been chiming in, and also the chat thread's been tremendous. So thank you all. Dr. Cecilia Dones, I mean, just amazing. Look forward to following more of your work, hopefully having you back here. And you're bringing up so many important issues for us to follow.
Thank you so much. And this is a very special group. You've created a community, and the fact that everyone shows up for themselves and each other, it's something special.
Well, appreciate you getting to join us for all that and you sharing that. Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll keep seeing you next week. Next week, if you're in New York, we've got First Wednesday in person next Wednesday. So be sure to check the event page for that. Yeah, just tremendous slate of speakers ahead. So thanks everyone, and see you soon.